that is certainly a live stream.
Great.
Good to go?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Really? We are back in France at the Circuit Paul Ricard, where Max Verstappen has just taken pole ahead of the two Mercedes cars after a close fight out front. Welcome back to the Formula One Grid Talk podcast. Today we are looking at the big talking points from the French Grand Prix qualifying session. My name is Ruby Price, and joining me today we have Formula Shakedown Steve Jackson.
Hello.
And Monkey Seat Podcasts Tom Horrox.
Hi.
Hi. Firstly, we would love it if you could take 5 minutes to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We do shout out all of you who leave 5 stars. So, Tom, Verstappen on pole, the Mercedes just behind. That championship battle is definitely very much still on, isn't it?
Yes, is a dominant pole. He was in control all weekend. He was topping most sessions. I think it's only 2 sessions he didn't top. He's run close in the end, actually a lot closer than I thought he'd be run by the Mercedes. Lewis obviously just a couple of tenths back, but I think it's big for Red Bull that they can show that they're better than, or they can beat Mercedes at this track, because this is a Mercedes track through and through. So he's going to be he's in the box seat to have a good result here now. My only concern is with his teammate a couple of places back, still where he realistically should be, but he needs to make sure that he stays in touch with them so that they can out strategy Mercedes. Sorry, because if Perez is back in the pack, that's going to cause problems in the race. But he's done the hard work. He just needs to follow it through for the race now. But he was unbeatable today, absolutely unbeatable.
Yeah, and when 7 tenths ahead at the end of P3, I thought it was going to be all over. In fact, I thought it was going to be all over when he set that blistering time in Q1. But no, Steve, Lewis just 2 tenths behind pretty much in P2. It's going to be a long run down to that first corner, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think Mercedes ended up quite where they expected to be. They've obviously come off the back of a couple of relatively poor weekends for the team in general as well. So, work cut out for them. Looking at Lewis's qualifying, though, I was really surprised to see, especially in, I think it was Q1, did a 1:31.237. Max did 1:31.001, and what we've seen in the past is that Mercedes will leave it till Q3 to properly put their foot down, but that just never seemed to eventuate. I thought that it would be at least a wee bit closer. There's only 2 and a bit tenths in it, as Tom mentioned, but it's definitely not the result I expected. I think I predicted Lewis to walk away with this one, but so far it's things are I don't think Red Bull have quite got this in the bag, but they've definitely got the initiative.
I mean, he did go a second quicker than his Q1 time in Q3, but the power did go down, just not quite enough to take pole away from the Red Bulls. But Tom, there has been a suggestion that the Mercedes have a better race car for this weekend, and based on qualifying alone, they did look much more comfortable on the medium tyres. They've got Lewis and Valtteri right behind Max Verstappen. What do you think Bottas's chances are on the race day tomorrow?
Well, he seems to be on it now, and that's one thing that's always impressed me about Bottas. Apart from he's not really impressed me with his racecraft, but his ability to bounce back from a setback is always generally it's if he has a bad race, generally I'm backing him to be on the podium or getting pole in the next race. I never back him for a win because I just don't think there's not enough of them for that to be a valid prediction. But definitely he always seems to bounce back strong. And I think I predicted him for pole for this. So I mean, he wasn't quite on the pace there. But yeah, I don't think he's got a chance of winning the race. I think he could have done if he was ahead of Hamilton, barring an issue for Hamilton or a bad start and Bottas getting ahead. And if the strategy favours Bottas, then he could win the race. But it's kind of all down to the start, really. And if he can get ahead of Hamilton, he's on the slightly cleaner side of the grid, so it is possible. And Hamilton's starting is a little bit Jekyll and Hyde. Sometimes he can have absolute blinders, other times he can be slow away. But Bottas is the same. So I don't know if it's a Mercedes trait or it's a him trait. If he can get the same kind of start that Lewis got in that chassis in Baku at the restart, then I'm sure he'll be happy. But just make sure he doesn't press that little button at the back. So yeah, he's got a chance, and he's shown that he's not washed up. There's a few people predicting that he's just going to go on a spiral downhill, and I'm glad he hasn't for his sake. So yeah, as good a chance as anyone, but it's going to be tough because I think Verstappen's overall pace looks to be the business, and Hamilton always sets up his cars for the races as well. So I can see him pulling away from Bottas and pulling more towards Max. I think it's probably a field of 2 for the win tomorrow, and he's just got to make sure that he does the business for the team. He's in that pit window and stays ahead of Perez. That's his main job for tomorrow.
Yeah, there's no porridge in the world that would have me backing Valtteri Bottas for that win. But yeah, Steve, Sergio Perez, P4, he won last time out in Baku, which, is great to see that, Red Bull have finally got a second driver capable of, winning, although it did take Max Verstappen being face first in a wall for it to happen. But yeah, P4 only 1/10 behind Valtteri Bottas. His job tomorrow is to get ahead of at least one of those Mercedes cars. But do you think he can do it?
Tom hit on a really good point before, just with the sort of almost bipolar nature of the Mercedes actually being able to leave the grid quickly. I think we saw in Imola, wasn't it, that Checo put a lot of pressure on Hamilton and just helped Max get the priority in that run down to turn 1. So he's positioned ideally to do the same thing again. He's only, like you mentioned, a 10th behind Bottas. He's still half a second off Max, though. I don't think that's ideally where the team would want him to be. You'd want him within a couple of tenths to really be in there with him. But then again, that sort of those, from second to fifth, there's half a second between 4 cars, so it's fair enough that there's a bit of shuffling late in Q3 with that. Still really good performance. He is there or thereabouts of where he needs to be, but the good thing is it's definitely looking like like tires are going to be very important tomorrow. They're important every race, but the softs I don't think are a compound that are actually going to be a race winning tire. I don't think they'll factor into the into those sort of podium positions very much at all, unless something weird happens, like we see a red flag and a late rush, a late red flag and a rush to put softs on for that extra point. But Checo's really, really gentle on tires. We know that, so he does have that trick up his sleeve and might be able to exploit it tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. The softs, it's worth mentioning, in most cars seem to struggle to get a full flying lap on, but every now and then you saw a driver pulling off, a quicker second lap on them, which was good to see, I think, based off, the tyre performance last race weekend. But Tom, on to car number 55, MP5, all of the fives, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, a bit back to earth after the last 2 qualifying sessions, which the McLaren fan in you, I'm sure, will be pleased to know about. But, they are ahead of their, championship rivals, McLaren, on the grid with both cars. What are you expecting from Carlos Sainz tomorrow?
was dead impressed with Carlos Sainz and Leclerc, to be honest, but particularly Carlos Sainz. And yet, yes, I am a huge McLaren fan, as I'm sure it's going to shock people to know. But if Ferrari are going to win, I want it to be Carlos Sainz. I still love him. He's still McLaren through and through for me, really. So I was dead impressed with him. I thought Ferrari were going to be... they looked like they were nowhere in the early sessions. I think was it 16th in first practice he was, and he just didn't look like Ferrari were gonna pick up at all. But he got gradually quicker. I mean, P3 is a bit of an anomaly, but he got gradually quicker as the weekend went on, and then that last out qualifying the McLarens and his teammate, most importantly, big result for him there. He's out-qualified Leclerc a few times before. He showed at McLaren that he's a great qualifier, because Norris is a fantastic qualifier, and he matched him both seasons, like with one result each year was only the difference between them. So we know he's a great qualifier. He needs to perform well in the race now. He got sixth here in 2019. I think he needs to emulate that and do the same again. So yeah, if he can stay roughly where he is, I think he'll be happy with that. But he needs to keep his teammate behind him and keep those McLarens behind him to help Ferrari's push, because the midfield are catching up and they need to stay ahead of them.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of drivers who are going to be happy, Steve, Pierre Gasly had all of the pressure on him in Q3. You know, he had his lap time deleted for running off at T6, one of the few consistent applications of track limits. Not going to go on much more about that, hopefully not. But, you know, Pierre Gasly up in P6 in the AlphaTauri, you know, ahead of a Ferrari, ahead of a McLaren, ahead of the Alpines. Job done for Pierre Gasly in terms of qualifying.
Yeah, and no risk of a track limits rant from me this weekend. Sorry. Yeah, giant killing performance. He's much closer to Carlos Sainz in his Q3 time than he is Charles Leclerc as well. So he's definitely capable of putting pressure on Ferrari tomorrow and just making that, potentially being a bit of a spanner in the works for their strategy as well. And that midfield fight, that fight for fifth fourth is very busy at the moment. So Ferrari's going to feel that, McLaren's going to feel that. He's put himself in a very annoying position for those strong midfield teams. I don't necessarily think the AlphaTauri deserves to be there. The performances so far this season have either been excellent or just confusingly bad, to the point of being almost a bit of a joke, considering what we saw them pull out last year with that car, especially later in the season. But yeah, mega performance. I did notice, I'm not too sure what the comment or what the intention of his comment was, but in the pre-show before quali started, he mentioned that Red Bull is still on his radar, and I'm not 100% sure if that was a genuine comment from him, and if he still believes there's a way for him back into the proper team, or if it was just potentially throwing a bit of veiled shade their way. But either way, he's got every right to have that level of confidence in himself, because when that car works, he puts it in places I don't think it deserves to be.
Yeah, one driver consistently outperforming the AlphaTauri, Pierre Gasly. After the Ocon announcement for his Alpine extension, the options do seem to be closing up for him, but you never know. He might even end up being AlphaTauri for another year. Tom, let's talk about the other Ferrari car, Charles Leclerc. Just going back to you for the Ferraris. Maybe I'll miss you for the McLarens. I think I will miss you for the McLarens. Oh no bias. But yeah, P7 with his teammate in P5, he'll obviously be wanting to at least be, a position or two up the grid. But given that he also was dealing with track limits deletions, I think it was, or am I thinking of a different one? No, he just had a very bad lap at the start of Q1. What would you say? Job done? Or
yeah, it was a very similar story to his teammates, actually. As I said, with Carlos Sainz being very impressive, and he just gradually got quicker as the weekend went on. Ferrari just dialed into the track a lot better, and the Alpines looked strong at the start of the weekend, and I thought potentially the Ferraris would be trying to just kind of be fighting out with them, with the McLarens just ahead. But as it was Gasly doing his usual fantastic performance, and then Carlos and Charles pulling out but good laps when they count. Seventh place is, again, it's the clean side of the grid, so starting directly behind his teammate, he's going to be looking to just get ahead of that AlphaTauri off the line. But with that Honda engine in, I think that's going to be tough. But to move on from there, definitely he's going to look to follow Carlos Sainz for the early part and then try and strategize his way past. But that'll be difficult. So we'll see. I mean, he's very good at starts. Charles as well. He does tend to get good starts, and the Ferrari as well just tends to be a good starting machine. It'll be hard for him to repeat his podium from last time we were here. But he's going to give it a damn good go, and yeah, it again should be a strong day for Ferrari. They've won here more than most, probably more than anyone. So I say here, I mean the French Grand Prix. So but obviously Paul Ricard is a very different animal these days. But certainly with regard to the French Grand Prix, they've got a rich history here. So they're going to want to try and carry that on.
Yeah, definitely. Steve, Lando Norris, a very mysterious qualifying session with, what will have been a very nervy end to Q2 after being told to return to the box before he sets a lap. Fortunately, no one improved from a McLaren perspective, but even so, Lando Norris in P8 behind the Ferraris, so we'll be disappointed with that. But given that there was a chance that he might not have even made it into Q3 at all, I think he'll be happy with that in a sense.
Yeah, wrong side of the Ferraris. They've ended up, as you mentioned, slightly anemic performance from both of them. It was a bit odd to watch. That they've been sort of just circulating quietly this weekend. Whether that's just a trait of the McLaren around this particular circus, or if there's, if they've started to focus more heavily on next year's car, and we can expect other teams to sort of level out as well. I'm not 100% sure at this stage. It's still quite early in the season, so I'd be quite surprised if it was the latter. From memory, though, I don't think McLaren have done. They've sort of been middle of the road in 2018 and 2019. I think Lando last time we were here was suffering with a power unit issue or something as well, so he didn't quite place where he necessarily should have. But yeah, just a bit of a weird performance. They, their pace in long runs has looked pretty good this season so far. So there is still potential for him to at least get past Charles, and start moving his way up. But he's qualified sort of lower down than where I would have expected him to, and where I would have expected that car to be as well. So be interesting to see how that plans out tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely, especially when you consider a couple of races ago, he was threatening for pole. So, it'd be good for McLaren to re-find their earlier pace. Tom, Fernando Alonso, P9 in the Alpine, he's going to be at least happy with that, given, he's just been slowly but surely building on, his performances this season. And with it being French team, Alpine, they want, to at least be coming away from this race weekend with points.
Yeah, he'll be dead happy to out-qualify Ocon as well, given that he's now jumped him in the championship as well after his good result in the last race, which probably doesn't quite tell the story, given that Ocon probably would have been higher had he not had his power unit issue on the first couple of laps. But yeah, he's going to be very, very happy to be ahead of Ocon and in Q3 and try and move forward from there. They've gone for the headline times at the start of the week with him up there as sort of 7th and 4th in the early sessions. But I think probably drifted back to his natural position, which I think they're probably the 5th fastest team. So 9th and 10th will be the natural positions of those cars. So they're kind of where they should be, and they're going to want to try and move forward with the French Grand Prix being a French team and having a French driver in there as well. He's going to want to push forward, and I believe he was here in 2018, but that's the only time he's been here, and I believe it was a pretty appalling race for him. I think he finished 18th or may have retired with a oh, there's no point carrying on. So it'd be good if he can get a positive French Grand Prix experience, even if, it'd be good if someone could get a positive French Grand Prix experience at some point as well. That'd be good. But he'll be overall happy with that. I think deep down he probably would have thought, you know what, I could have been a slightly higher up, but I think that's probably asking a little bit much. But he's ahead of McLaren, he's ahead of his teammate, so he's got to be happy with that.
Yeah, I seem to remember a lot of the latter years of Fernando Alonso's previous stint of his career having a lot of, there's no point carrying on with this race, so let's just finish it now moments. But, he'll be glad to be putting those behind him. So, Steve, Daniel Ricciardo, P10 in the McLaren, after his run of qualifying form, he's going to at least be happy with that.
Yeah, and I think considering the way the season's gone so far, he's not far off Lando at all in terms of his qualifying results. I think it was half a second off or thereabouts in Q3, but then in Q1, sorry, but Q2 and 3, he's narrowed that down to, I think, biggest gap is about 0.2 or just under. So he, taking that into consideration, that's it's a good performance for him. It's nice to see him in Q3. It was nice to see both McLarens in Q3. So yeah, that's on relative pace. I think that's a good performance from him, considering it looks like it's just a bit of a limitation with the car rather than a significant difference in driver. With previous performances from Daniel so far this year, it looks pretty difficult for him to actually get to grips with the car. So that's promising. Hopefully it's not a blip, and it is an indication that he's finally gotten on top of whatever issues he's been battling so far this year.
Yeah, for sure. So, Tom, with everyone ahead of him starting on used mediums, Esteban Ocon in P11 is very much in the right sort of place if you're not going to be starting in the top 10. So, with fresher tyres and a very good start, he's starting P11. Where do you think we could see him, finishing tomorrow? How do you think he's going to do?
Well, if Baku's anything to go by, he can finish second, because that's what Vettel did last time out. So a good strategy. You could definitely see him moving further up the field. That's going to be the aim. The being able to start on a free choice of tyre is going to help. I believe was Fernando Alonso on mediums when he went through. I can't remember off the top of my head. But
everyone in the top 10's on the mediums, I believe.
Okay, so starting 11th is going to be a little bit negated in this one. Then if everyone ahead is going to be on the mediums, so he'll be a little bit disappointed with that. Probably the worst race to start 11th, especially being a home Grand Prix. But again, he'll be disappointed he's behind his teammate, given that he started so strongly, and Fernando has got a habit of getting people behind him, and if he's behind him if he's ahead of Ocon in the championship, then he's going to start rallying members of the team to get around him. I know he's got his new contract now, Ocon, which is great. He's got that security, so he hasn't got to worry about him being forced out of the team and dropped like Stoffel Van Dorn was when he was Alonso's teammate. So he's at least got that security there, so he doesn't have to worry. But he's gonna want to push ahead, because a returning to form Fernando Alonso is a very dangerous person to be teammates with. So he's going to want to show that going into next year, he can boss that team. Looking at the standings, he's just a point behind his teammate, and realistically, with the guys ahead of him, he's in 12th, Alonso in 11th. Realistically, 11th is kind of where he can really be. I don't think they've got any chance of catching the Ferraris, the McLarens. I mean, maybe if Ricciardo doesn't improve, then he might have the chance of picking him off. But so really, 11th or 10th is the best he's going to hope for. So it's just maximising each weekend and beating his teammate as often as possible. Hopefully, home Grand Prix, he can pull something special out of the bag, and we wait to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, last time out, Sebastian Vettel finally returned to the podium, being one of the few drivers to actually appear on the podium in so many different teams, in the turbo hybrid era. He's starting P12. It's a bit of a much more return to, where the Aston Martins are used to fighting out. Do you think he's got a chance of points tomorrow?
If you asked me before qualifying, maybe, but that was possibly just leftover excitement from Baku. He's sort of returned to where we sort of realistically expect that car to be. I think looking at Baku as well, the pace that Stroll had shows that there is a window where that car works really well, but I don't think it's necessarily here, which is surprising considering it's a photocopied 2019 Mercedes, and that car did pretty well around Paul Ricard in 2019. But I'm not disappointed, but I'm sure Seb possibly is feeling a bit sort of not down in the dumps, but a bit disappointed about the result just based on what happened last time out. So if he can move up at all, it would I don't necessarily think it would be early on track fighting for position, but it'd be either an opportunistic safety car and pitting at the right time, or just being able to get some clean air and get the undercut on somebody ahead of him. I think it'll be a fairly standard weekend for that team in general, where they can sort of expect to end up where they qualify.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't unmute myself then. Tom, Antonio Giovinazzi chucked on a pair of softs to try and, make an impact in Q2, but unfortunately for Antonio and Alfa Romeo, it sadly wasn't to be, but it did keep him ahead of George Russell in the Williams. So given that they are a good team for randomly picking up points every now and then, that will at least be working in their favour.
Yeah, I mean, the car's not really going anywhere, and it doesn't look like it's going to be going anywhere for the rest of the season. So realistically, it's just making sure that he can be ahead of those back markers and be there in high attrition races to pick up points. I don't think France is going to be that, although we have seen a huge amount of drivers somehow managing to find the barriers around this place, which is just shocking, really, given the amount of runoff we've got. But we seem to be having a lot of walls hit, so there may well be hope. You never know. There are Hasses on the track after all, so you never know. We may have some barriers being hit at some point. So seeing him into the points in this race, I'd say it's unlikely. But as you say, he is ahead of Mr. Saturday, and he's ahead of his teammate. Yes, ahead of his teammate. Yeah, of course he is. And so he's going to want to try and move forward, as it is everyone, because it's a race and that's what they want to do. But it's just going to be a case of just hang around between the back markers in the midfield, trying to pick up any scraps that get left behind, making uses of himself when possible. He's not got a great history at the track either. I think he's raced just the once here and made Q3, started 10th and then ended up dropping back further and further through the field. So he's not exactly got a pedigree at this track either, but he hasn't really got a pedigree anywhere, to be honest. So hopefully he can do something, because he's gonna start becoming under pressure once Alfa Romeo decide what they're doing next year, and once Sauber decide what they're doing. They've got a whole host of young drivers in the Sauber Junior program that are going to be itching to get into that car. And if Giovinazzi doesn't bring Ferrari backing, he doesn't bring an awful lot to a team. So his only real hope is if Kimi Räikkönen decides that he's finally bored and they want a driver to maintain the consistency. That's realistically his only chance of staying. He's out qualifying a Kimi Räikkönen that's way past his best. So great, but he needs to do more, really. But he can certainly start that by making use of himself and grabbing some points every now and then. So that's his only real hope for this race, and indeed his career in Formula One.
Yeah, definitely. It's great out qualifying Kimi, but as you say, he's well past his best. But speaking of good qualifiers, Steve, George Russell, P14, he was disappointed with the results of Q1, understandably, with it ending with a red flag, but he still made it through, which is important. Still, has his unbeaten record against a teammate in a Williams. P14, until the race actually starts and the Williams starts going backwards, that's a good result for George Russell. Yep,
standard operating procedure for George on a Saturday, isn't it? Putting that car where it doesn't deserve to be, which is disappointing. I think a lot of us had slightly higher hopes for Williams under their new ownership, but yeah, that's a standard performance from him. He punched out a seconds from his Q1 time in Q2 as well. He did a 1:33.06 in Q1 and then a 1:32.065 in Q2. So he's obviously found something there, and that's relative pace in Q1 to everyone else. So he can make that car go faster, but it just works in a very narrow window. It's very, very aero sensitive. It's very aero sensitive and very unwilling to cope with sudden changes in environment, whether that's dirty air from another car or a crosswind or that sort of thing. So a lot of these performances that he's putting in are that they are fairly circumstantial, but the fact that he can drive around some of those problems does show what sort of driver he is, and I think he will be moving next year, but that's obviously a different conversation for another time. But yeah, really good performance. That car will probably go backwards Sunday afternoon though, so yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but it's definitely where we expect him to be. Another good, solid performance.
Yeah, and drivers who are not where we expected them to be, Tom, Mick Schumacher, P15, obviously crashed at the end of Q1, causing the red flag and being automatically promoted into Q2. And Haas will be praying that his suspension and gearbox are all okay, because if he does start from P15, that as much as we know the Haas will go backwards, that's still a much better starting position than anyone would have ever predicted this Haas Ferrari to be.
Yeah, he's getting more like his dad every day with performances like that, isn't he? And I am, of course, referring to the Monaco at the Rascasse. Now, obviously, we know he hasn't done that on purpose, but it's yet another red flag that's allowed somebody to start higher than they realistically deserve to be. It's great. He's on paper, he's outqualified George Russell. George was, I think I was looking at his sector times when he was going around. He was at least half a second up, maybe even more than that. When the red flag was shown, when he crashed out in sector 2. George was already in sector 3, so I thought, oh, that's fine. It's not going to affect his time. He's going to get through. Didn't need it in the end, fortunately, but it's still a bitter pill to swallow for certainly all the guys behind him who are starting behind Mick on the grid that realistically were going to go faster than him. They were putting in quick sector times. Generally, a lot of people were. I think naturally he probably would have dropped back down to probably 18th or 17th, but that's where he is because that's the rules, and he's in 15th. It goes down as a Q2 qualification, even if he didn't take part in Q2. Like you say, I can't see him certainly pushing on from there. It's just going to be a rearguard action, hope for some rain, safety car, lightning, fire, whatever they can muster to try and get further up, or just hope for something to happen there. But being at the front of that pack is all that he can do, and just stay there as long as he can. So, and you can't take it away from him. It was a great lap. It was a great lap to get him there in the first place. So the only one in the in that group to get into the 132s. So that was certainly a good performance in a car that is obviously incredibly difficult to drive. So yeah, he's hats off to him for that. But bad Mick, don't hit the barrier.
Yeah, and then in order to set a fast lap, you've got to actually set a lap in the first place. So you should do it the first time round if in case of any situations like this. And we've seen even multiple world champions come off at the short straw because of it. But Steve, let's look at Nicholas Latifi, P16, behind Mick Schumacher, which isn't the first time I've said this season, but it might not even be the last. But he's going to be sad to have been in the situation that he was in.
Yeah, it's quite hard to talk about Latifi, isn't it? Because he's usually very conspicuous by his absence. It's same with George. It's where we sort of expect him to be. He has shown on long runs in ideal conditions that he can sort of keep up with those around him. His racecraft's really good. He's definitely maturing as a driver. I don't think we'll see much more of him until if and when he gets into a more competitive car, or if Williams have a sudden change of fortune next year. Not too sure what his contract situation is for next year, whether he's got another year with Williams, but I'd like to see him stick around because he's definitely a driver capable of good performances. But this has been another weekend so far in general where he's just he's been an also ran, and that's not his fault. But I think for him to stand out as a driver who another team may want, that Williams either needs to suddenly go faster or he needs to start doing George Russell things.
Yeah, George Russell things. That'll be in the Williams debriefing. So Tom, P17, a not his best Kimi Räikkönen. It's Kimi. He's just satisfied showing up at a weekend, but even so, Alfa Romeo don't want him to be, going out in Q1.
No, you're really liking me today. Give me all of the Ferrari-powered cars, and you know how I love the Alfa Romeos and the Hasses. But no, Kimi. Was he even there? I don't recall seeing him on the feed once, to be honest. But the fact that he's qualified four places behind his teammate, he was over half a second, 0.6 behind his teammate in Q1. So that's not really good enough. And then the fact that Giovinazzi kicked on from that, he was He was a second and a half behind Giovinazzi's eventual finishing position. Don't know if it's track specific. Don't know if he had a particularly bad one lap before the red flag. Potentially, it's possible. I didn't see his sector times when the red flag came out, but yeah, he's starting 17th. That's not great, especially when you've got a couple of people at the back there that just have no pace and one that crashed out. So it's not good at all. So he's definitely going to be under pressure to make a decision on next year. I'm pretty sure that he's got absolute carte blanche on whether he gets that drive next year or not, which is kind of, I hope he does the right thing for the sport and for his legacy and potentially and give that up, because he's certainly not going to be driving through the field in that car. He might pick something up if craziness happens, because he can drive a car at a reasonable speed and stay out of trouble. He's very good in traffic. He's very good in wheel-to-wheel battles, in not causing incidents. So yeah, if there's craziness, then he can potentially pick something up and pick up the odd point here and there. But yeah, he's not really he's not going to be doing much from there.
No, absolutely not. And speaking of drivers that we don't expect much of, in P18, the second Haas Ferrari driver Nikita Mazepin, 0.2 off Kimi Räikkönen, which Haas will be looking at favourably, Steve. But this is just another, other than Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda, who one crashed out, one didn't set a classified time. This is just another back of the grid Haas performance.
Yeah, he spun like 3 times, and that was about as memorable as he got this weekend. Makes the Haas look slow, which is an achievement in itself. But I won't bag him too much this weekend, because honestly, I think I've said it as much as I need to highlight my thoughts around Mazepin. But again, it's exactly where we expect him to be. His teammate has proven that car can go reasonably quick in good conditions. So yeah, I don't expect much. I imagine he'll circulate in the position that he's qualified tomorrow. If shenanigans ensue, he's probably going to be the reason why there's a safety car, a red flag, a portal into another dimension. I don't know. But yeah, just another also ran performance that I just don't have much interest in, to be honest. I don't think many people do.
Yeah, absolutely not. So Tom, Lance Stroll set a time of 2 minutes, 12 seconds, and 584 milliseconds. What went wrong with Lance Stroll's race today? Qualifying session today.
Yeah, it's multiple stories of his qualifying session. Really, he's he was unable to set a time first time out. So his Q1 lap time was deleted for track limits, and then obviously the red flag ruined his final run. But what that doesn't tell you is the fact that he had the opportunity to set a banker. He was on the way round circulating. He ballsed up his second run, and then asked his engineer should he pit or carry on. No, you have to go. He backed off and started saving his battery up again, and then was going for a last lap shot at the position. But you put yourself in that position and you open yourself up to that kind of thing happening, a yellow flag, a red flag, traffic. If you're gonna be right on the cusp like he was, then that's what's going to happen. But to be honest, looking at the way he'd performed in his previous runs, I'm pretty sure he would have gone out in Q1 anyway, even if he had put a lap in. George's time was looking solid. Schumacher was quicker than him anyway, so I think he potentially would have jumped Mick Schumacher, but Kimi probably would have jumped him the way things were going, to be honest. And I think it's, to be honest, he probably doesn't deserve to be way back where he is in 19th, but he probably doesn't deserve to be any higher than 17th anyway. So it's not a great performance. I mean, Aston Martin looked like they were nowhere, but then the practice times certainly didn't show him in good stead. I mean, you saw 14th, 16th, and 13th. So qualifying 19th shouldn't be a massive surprise. But Vettel was nowhere in the practice sessions as well. So it looked like they were nowhere. But then Vettel dragged it up to a midfield starting place, and Stroll once again has fallen at the first hurdle. So he's definitely improved, but he's still not that regular qualifying master that you need for someone who's for a car that, let's be honest, was the second fastest car really it panned out in the last race, finishing second. So he's going to be he's got a lot of work to do tomorrow, but potentially the Aston Martin's strategy department seem to be certainly putting in earning their money anyway. So if they can do something similar to what they did in the last one, probably start him on the hards, run him long, a fortunate safety car, he should have the pace to move through the field. Whether he will or not is a completely different matter, but he certainly should have a chance of pushing for the points tomorrow if things happen favourably for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve, any little remarks on Yuki Tsunoda after we saw a very twerky AlphaTauri?
For those listening on Spotify, I've got my head in my hand. It's incredibly frustrating because we saw a very different Yuki Tsunoda in Bahrain at the beginning of the season. I was mighty impressed, and I was sitting there thinking, yeah, this is Kamui Kobayashi or Takuma Sato. This is like the return of the Japanese driver that's been missing from the grid, and he's suddenly become Yuji Ide. It's not. I don't know what it is. Karun Chandok made a really good comment that he needs a driver coach, and I don't think he's got one at the moment, and that could possibly help. But I also wonder what sort of pressure he's under, not from AlphaTauri, but from Red Bull themselves, from Helmut Marko and that sort of thing, to perform, because they're obviously lining him up to be a future works Red Bull driver. And so far he's shown that he's not that driver at all. He's quite the opposite. Really just silly mistake. He took way too much curb heading into T1. Mounted the sausage curb and completely unloaded the car, and that was it. And the back of the car was doing all sorts of weird shit heading into the excuse my French, heading into the tie barrier. It looked awful, and I imagine that there's been quite a bit of load transferred through into that gearbox. So yeah, obviously it's not going to harm his race tomorrow because he's last anyway. He can't go any further than where he is already. But another massive knock to his confidence, and it's a shame because he's in a very, very competitive and ruthless group of drivers, and he's getting quite a bit of negative attention on social media and that sort of thing, which I don't think is entirely warranted. He's expected to make mistakes, and the pressure that he's under must be enormous. And he's obviously willing to try and help himself. He's relocated from the UK to Italy, and obviously that has to be a mutual agreement for that to happen. So he's obviously willing to make the steps to try and improve as a driver. But yeah, it's really sad. And we've got 2 races coming up at Austria after this, so hopefully something he's a wee bit more familiar with, and he has a couple of opportunities that will yield better results.
Yeah, what Yuki very much needs at the minute is consistency, and the only thing consistent really is poor performances. So who knows what's going to happen with Yuki Tsunoda. Right, let's get some predictions going. What was that, Steve?
I was just going to say, what other junior drivers is Helmut Marko able to defrost at short notice to put in the AlphaTauri?
Alex Albon?
He finished a mighty 14th in the opening DTM round today, so he'll obviously be hot property.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Daniel Kvyat it is then.
What about?
Hey, I wouldn't say no.
Curveball, Brendan Hartley.
Hey.
Yes, but I'm incredibly biased because obvious reasons.
Bias on this podcast? Never heard of her. Anyway, let's get some top 3 predictions, if you please. Tom, let's start with you. Is Max Verstappen staying on first, or are you putting your money on someone else?
Oh, I better get this right because I'm on the race review tomorrow as well. So the pressure's on. So let me think. So 2019, we've just had the one retirement. It does have a tendency for first lap incidents. Strong DRS. So you can overtake on the straight. But Red Bull do look like they're going to be strong. I saw that there's a possibility of rain tomorrow. I'm not sure if that's still the case. It was like a 30% chance, which obviously means there's a 70% chance of no rain. So I think I'm gonna go for Hamilton to do the job. I think he's gonna. Obviously, he's won here the last 2 times we've been here. Mercedes do tend to run better in the race than qualifying, and Hamilton especially runs better in the race. And I think he's going to have his little wingman there, desperately trying to keep up, and he's going to back him up to go for the win. I think it's going to be a really strong performance from Mercedes, and I'm going to go with the old classic Hambot Ver, which is going to be not what anyone wants for the season. But I just think that's what's going to happen. So bold prediction. You want that yet, or shall I do that later?
Let's go around first.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just going to carry on from Tom. I think Lewis will take the top step, mostly because he knows he needs to win this race. You know, there has been a lot of momentum going in Red Bull's favour. They are clear at the top of the Constructors' Championship. Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton both scoring no points in Baku has helped them stay somewhat, in touch with each other. But, Lewis needs to win this for the sake of just having some momentum again. So I'm going to go Ham Verbot, mostly because I'm not expecting much from Porridge, as Steve has very lovingly dubbed him. But go on then, Steve. Your top 3, if you please.
Yeah, no surprises, I think. Mine is very similar to both of yours, actually. Yeah, I think on race pace, Mercedes have sort of got the upper hand there very slightly. The only way I can see Verstappen winning is if Hamilton either is out for X reason, or if there's a late safety car which closes the grid back up. But I expect by sort of that first pit, by the pit window opening, I imagine he'll be a few seconds clear already. Just with that massive straight, he'll be able to break the toe from Max and just head down the road. Not expecting Bottas to hang around in that top 3. I think he'll end up sort of 4th or 5th. So I'm going to say Hamilton, Verstappen, Prix for my top 3.
Ham Ver Pair.
That's
Tom,
the one.
Your bold prediction is now requested.
Okay, sorry for jumping the gun a little bit there. I mean, despite what I said earlier about this having a tendency for first lap incidents, I think it's my bold prediction would be this is going to be only, I believe it's the 10th race in Formula 1 history to not have any retirements. Yeah, and as a backup bold prediction, I think Sassy Massey's going to have something to say on the radio again that's going to get people up in arms.
Sassy Massey. Steve, let's get your bold prediction.
Well, my bold prediction was exactly the same as Tom's bold prediction of no retirements. It's just, I feel like it's going to be a fairly formulaic race tomorrow. If I'm honest, there will be a little bit of action, but it'll be mostly just par for the course. Bold prediction. I've got to think of a bold prediction on the spot here now. Gasly top 5. I think he's close enough to Carlos on pace and track position as well to be annoying. And I think he'll end up in that top 5 group. He's got the bit between his teeth at the moment, and he'll be coming off the back of that podium very, very encouraged and just very happy with the season so far. So Gasly top 5, nice and easy.
Not to mention the home fans cheering him on, which they say gives you an advantage. I'm gonna go with George Howson's usual bold prediction of George Russell for his first points in the Williams. He's given me some support in the chat, so I'm gonna give him some support in his predictions. And finally, let's also give a star of qualifying out. So, Tom, who was your star of qualifying?
I'm going to go Carlos Sainz for out qualifying his teammate convincingly and putting the Ferrari somewhere where I just didn't expect it to be. So yeah, Carlos Sainz, I'm going to go.
Carlos Sainz is a very strong one. Personally, I'm going to give it to Pierre Gasly just because so much pressure in Q3, home Grand Prix as well, putting it in 6th, only being a couple of hundredths off the Ferrari ahead of him. That's a solid performance from Pierre Gasly, in my opinion. And Steve, your star of qualifying, please.
Daniel Ricciardo. Silence.
No, I mean, really I love it. I just didn't expect it.
It's good to see his relative pace to his teammate. That's encouraging. He's had a pretty rotten season so far, let's be honest. So he's a couple of tenths away from Lando. McLaren, like I said before, haven't really had a strong weekend so far. So on relative pace, I think that's a really good performance. It was nice to see him in Q3. If he's not happy with that, I am. So there we go.
There we go. Right, Tom, let's give you an opportunity to promo the Monkey Seat podcast. Where can people find it? Give us an elevator pitch.
Okay, well, we're Monkey Seat Podcast. We cover all motorsport, including IndyCar and Formula 2, Formula 3, Extreme E. We've got some great interviews with people involved in the sport as well, which is always fun to have them on. You can get us at Monkey Seat Pod on the socials, and we're on all major podcasting platforms. We're on YouTube as well, and we tend to stream out the episodes live and then heavily edit them down with all the mistakes ready for the podcast release the next day.
Perfect. It sounds like my kind of cup of tea. Steve, the Formula Shakedown, give us a pitch.
Elevator pitch, right. Facebook group, largely Australasian based, but you can be from anywhere in the world. You just need to be an open wheel fan. So we talk about anything and everything. So Super Formula, F1, IndyCar, Indy Lights, F2, F3, S5000. We're on Facebook. Just look us up, Formula Shakedown. So basically it's a no hate group as well. So you are required to behave, but we uphold that very strongly. So if you want to get away from the toxic nature of social media, especially when it comes to F1 and that sort of thing, then we're your spot.
Sounds great, especially getting away from the toxic aspects. There are so many bad, social media in itself, but yeah, totally 100%. And if you want to know anything more about me, I'm a YouTuber, I make vlogs, and I'm also another podcast host on Fresh from the Scene, looking at the music that's local to Huddersfield, Yorkshire, and Manchester. give us a follow. Cool. So Grid Talk is available on Amazon as well as YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Verbal, Omni Studio, and Pocket Casts. Just search F1 Grid Talk. We have a huge back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to qualifying and the race results. We are on Reddit, search for the subreddit F1 Grid Talk, and we also have a Patreon for mics, lights, and better recording equipment. Also, make sure you subscribe so you're first to know when each new weekly episode is released. We'll be back tomorrow to review the results from the French Grand Prix. Stay tuned if you're watching the YouTube live stream. We've got a couple more things to talk about. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to Tom and Steve for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanking you.
No worries, and goodbye. Stop. Thank you very much, Zoom, for telling us that the Zoom meeting has
Is that
stopped.
new?
It's new. They introduced it, and it completely shook me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes through like twice as loud as anything else that's ever existed on the planet as well. So
yeah, the first time I heard it, headphones in, I turned it up because I had a quiet guest on my podcast, and boom.
Yep.
There is one comment first to get an answer for in the live stream from Connor Walker. What do you guys think Ocon's new contract means for the second Mercedes seat? I know he was always in Toto's good books.
I think I haven't heard it specifically, but I'm pretty sure that ends any association with Mercedes. I know that when the conversation about Ocon was from Toto Wolff was certainly Alpine have first refusal, and so I think that must be the terms of the loan. It was a 2-year loan to the Renault Group. The terms of that must have then been 2-year loan with a view to a permanent contract, but very similar to the kind of things we see in football. So I think I think that's ended the ties. I haven't heard anything direct from Toto Wolff or Mercedes to confirm that, but I mean, you can't have one of your acquisitions out on loan for 5 years. That's just I just don't think they would. I mean, I think they would certainly look at Ocon in future if he was doing well, but I think that ends all ties and any hold that Mercedes have on it. And certainly if I was Alpine, I wouldn't want to take a driver who was owned by another group for a 3-year period. I know Williams did, but they're in a completely different situation. So I think with Alpine looking to push on and push for race victories and championships in future, they're going to want a driver that's committed to their future, not someone else's. So yeah. I think that ends any association with Mercedes, which is good news for any potential Mercedes young drivers. It's a slight glint in the tunnel for Valtteri Bottas as well, as they don't have anyone else ready to plug in apart from George Russell. So are they then going to think, well, if Hamilton does decide to retire next year, who are we going to plug in, because they won't have anyone ready at that point. So I think that certainly gives Bottas a potential chance.
Yeah, the other thing as well with the Williams is, of course, Williams are very much helped out a lot by the Mercedes team, and I believe they get a discount on gearboxes or engines because of Russell's association. So that is also an aspect. But Steve, did you have anything to add to the discussion?
Yeah, just to expand on what Tom was saying, I believe Toto Wolff remains as Esteban's manager, I think. But yeah, there's I imagine the Mercedes ties have been completely annulled. In terms of the longer term prospects for what that does to drivers going into which seat, I was having a chat with somebody on Formula Shakedown the other day, actually, just regarding that. We self-plug there. So my thoughts would be that Russell will end up alongside Hamilton next year. I think the writing's already on the wall for Bottas. Couple of comments that he's made earlier this season have sort of led me to believe that he already knows that he's on his way out. And the other driver, I think Mercedes might want to shoulder tap once Lewis decides to hang his boots up, is Pierre Gasly.
Pierre Gasly hanging his boots up?
No. So Pierre Gasly replacing Hamilton once he leaves. So I think in terms of how that would play out, Russell will go into Bottas's drive next year. or that's my thought on it anyway. And once Lewis decides to call it a day, then Gasly would be at least, I think he'd be at least worth considering for that other Mercedes drive. He's proven what he's capable of, and I think after his little mental reset that he's done and sort of figured himself out, basically, he's definitely worth looking at. But yeah, as you say, Ruby, there's plenty of other Mercedes talent out there who could fill that role too.
Yeah, what do you think on that, Tom? Pierre Gasly, would he be a good fit for Mercedes? If they needed to draft in someone else.
I think it's a damn good shout. I personally, I'm turning around on him. I was never really a massive fan of Gasly's. I thought he was a little bit overrated, but his performances this year more than last year have definitely turned me around on that. I don't know if that means that Tsunoda just isn't. Sorry, I've got a cat here. So I don't know if that is just that Tsunoda isn't a match for him, and so it's a bit easier than when he was fighting Daniel Kvyat. But I don't think that is the case, because I do rate Tsunoda as a driver in general. So I think that's a damn good shout. Other drivers on the grid, who else would potentially replace Hamilton if Ocon wasn't available and Russell was already in there? I can't think of anyone better. Who would be more ready. You could potentially say Charles Leclerc, but he's obviously tied into Ferrari. The other one would be Lando Norris, given that Toto Wolff's one of the companies that he owns has a stake in the management of Lando Norris. He's not represented by Toto Wolff, but there is definitely a link there. So that would be another option if he's solidly putting Daniel Ricciardo away for next year and a half. Then Lando Norris or Pierre Gasly would be the best two to go for that, I would say. Yeah,
as a Lando Norris fan, I would absolutely be happy with him going to Mercedes in the future. I want to see him maximise his potential for McLaren first.
Yeah, he can get 3 world championships with McLaren, then he can go to Mercedes.
I think it sort of depends on how McLaren do as well. Like if they continue their upwards trajectory, he might be well and truly happy to just become a career McLaren driver and not move elsewhere, and that's perfectly respectable. But yeah, I think a lot of this will now hinge on not Bottas's seat, but once Hamilton decides to retire, because I think he is within a year or two of retiring. That'll be where the silly musical chairs that we see in the silly season will kick off even more so, because everybody will be scrambling to get into that other Mercedes seat. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get an announcement at Silverstone that Bottas is out and George Russell is in. It seems like an opportune time to call it.
Yeah, Silverstone being, a good place to call it, like you say. So I want to return to something that we were talking about just before we started the show, with obviously this session being impacted by a red flag, last qualifying being impacted by a red flag, as well as the Monaco Grand Prix being interrupted by a red flag, pivotal moments. Some very good points put forward by both before the show, but there has been a big call for anyone who causes a red flag during qualifying to be punished in some way. I just wanted to get it mostly out into the world to have this, a continuation of this point. Steve, you were very much in favor of punishing the drivers with some form of time deletion or time penalty. Tom, you were very much the opposite and thinking of the more fair to the other drivers, solutions. Let's lay all our cards on the table here.
Oh, when I mentioned that I was all for it before Tom mentioned his what I now believe better idea, so I won't steal the thunder from him, Tom.
No, it's just more I think I know IndyCar use a similar system, but if you've got someone who's making a mistake on track, a minor mistake or a major mistake, it's that there's various different circumstances that can cause that. It could be something out of your control. There could be a bit of debris on track that wasn't put there by you, that you've ended up crashing because of that, or you've lost a little bit of front wing because you've hit a curb, and it just seems like the punishment doesn't fit the crime to delete their lap time based on that. So I propose that instead of that, if there is a red flag, or people's last runs are wrecked, even if that could even be on a yellow flag situation, that they all return to the pits and everyone gets one more run. And then if someone's retired from the session, then that's the punishment. The punishment then fits the crime. If you lay it out and just go for it in qualifying, then the punishment is if you crash, you're out, and then everyone else gets another go. I think that's a safer way of doing it. I know the issues with that are the scheduling commitments with television and everything. You might run over, but you could run over anyway with a red flag. So I think it would discourage people as well, because at the moment you've got people that just go for it in Q3. I'm not saying that Charles Leclerc did what he did in Monaco on purpose, but for sure he went into that lap knowing that he had pole, and if he binned it, it didn't matter so much because he already had pole. I'm not saying for 1 second that he crashed on purpose, because he didn't, but he certainly would have gone hell for leather and probably put a little bit more risk in, knowing that if he did cause a yellow flag, then that it wouldn't matter because he's already got pole. So I think it would discourage that, knowing that if you cause a red flag, you're out and everyone gets another run anyway. So, but the only other caveat to that would potentially be, how many times do you do it? On the next run, someone else causes a yellow flag. On the next run, someone else causes a yellow flag. It's just a never-ending circle. So I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I think that would be something that you could look at a bit more, rather than the IndyCar system of delete your last 2 lap times or something, because their qualifying format isn't identical to ours. So just a copy and paste wouldn't work in that sense.
Yeah, the other thing as well would be determining the order that you go out in. Do you do it in reverse championship order? Do you do it in reverse session order? So whoever was previously P10 goes out, at the head of the queue, or is it just whoever gets there first?
Yeah, that's another option as well. I personally, I think I like the strategic element of how they do it now. Just something a little bit fairer at the end if there is a red flag, which is just, it doesn't have to be the exact solution I suggested, but something along those lines would be, I think, would be the fairest way. I'm not on about completely ripping qualifying apart and redoing it, because it's great. I love qualifying, but I just think maybe something just to stop this chance, because if the teams have got a chance of manufacturing a result without cheating per se, then they're gonna take that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think in an ideal world, without deleting lap times and that sort of thing altogether, adding, you could look at adding a fair amount of time to a driver's race time or something like that, but then it would be incredibly hard to sort of justify the time that you allocate to a particular driver for causing a red flag, and then being able to make sure that it's proportionate. One of the things that's come up a few times during the practice sessions was the sausage curbs at the end of on the outside of turn 6. It broke a couple of cars. It completely ruins the front wing and the floor of Valtteri's car. And Ron Meadows jumped on the blower to Sassy Massey, as you called him, Tom, saying straight away that the sort of punishment doesn't really fit the transgression, and I fully agree there. But then it could be perceived too far the other way. Like if you only add 5 seconds to a driver's total race time for causing a red flag, that doesn't seem fair either. So you'd have to find a very good balancing point, and you're never going to satisfy every driver and every team. So I think it's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And the other thing that Tom mentioned as well is the broadcasting side of things can get quite murky when you've got consecutive delays to races and that sort of thing. So
yeah, just checking if anything had happened post qualifying as we liked to see last season. So far, nothing, which is certainly what we want. But we did see, as much as I didn't want to talk about track limits and stuff, there was a lot of mentions of Verstappen going wide at turn 2, which never really came up. And to me, it's the inconsistency of, if you're going to apply track limits things, why not make it consistent? But what are people's thoughts on that, given, there are obviously those sausage curbs that are there to stop, but, turn 6 was very much clinical in, I say wrecking. Stroll wrecked his own qualifying, but, Stroll going off at turn 6, no time. Gasly going off at turn 6 cancels his time. But turn 2 Verstappen went wide. No one wants to take the track limits.
I can take it. I was just conscious I took it last time. So do you want to go first, Steve?
Yeah, sure. It's one of those things where, if we raced at the same circuit 23 times a year, you could make it very, very clear cut for everybody, and everyone would just get on with it. But we obviously race at a variety of different circuits. Some of them are car parks like Paul Ricard. Some of them have absolutely no runoff like Monaco. So I think with respect to track limits themselves, I think a line needs to be drawn and just like made very, very clear from the get-go that if you cross a white line at a particular part of the track and that sort of thing, your time will be deleted. There will, and that doesn't stray from practice to the qualifying to the to qualifying to the race. I think the problem at the moment is race control are very willing to change the rules halfway through a session when it suits them, but when you've got people like Ron Meadows jumping in the blow to Michael Massey saying, "Hey, this is actually causing a considerable amount of damage to our car in terms of time lost repairing it, and also financially." There's just seeming disinterest from Michael Massey, and I hate bringing this up because it seems so. It almost seems cruel mentioning it or vain mentioning it, because there's absolutely nothing we can do about the situation. But I do sit there and wonder quite often, if Charlie Whiting were still with us, would we even be having this conversation? Because it's been in the last couple of years, especially that there just seems to be some fairly just blasé handling of track limits, and it's a discussion that we'll keep having until somebody turns around and just says, right, this is how it works from this point forward, and there will be no straying from the track limits that are assigned at the beginning of the weekend. But at the moment, it just seems like it's a very one-sided argument, and race control have all the power to do what they want. That's why they're there. But a lot of the time, I'm finding myself shaking my head at these times being deleted when there's no perceived gain or no perceived advantage to the driver for running wide at a particular corner.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing times just deleted and disappearing. I was at the British Grand Prix. I forget which year it was, but seeing in Q1 Jenson Button not qualifying for Q2, and after having a lap time deleted, and then on the next session or just before during the break, somebody else looked like they were going to have their time deleted. So as a result, Button would get back in for Q2, but because there wasn't time to delete it before, this was the first weekend they started deleting lap times, because there wasn't time to reshuffle everyone and get him back up there. They just left it. And it's that inconsistency that you see there. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing times just disappearing and people dropping back down to the bottom. You need something there potentially the sausage curbs aren't the most elegant solution of, the sausage curbs in Monza launched Alex Peroni into the crowd. So, potentially not the safest solution. And we don't want to see, races ruined. A great battle that's developing gets ruined because somebody, gets stuck in the dirty air behind another car and just understeers off and loses part of their front wing. We don't want to see that kind of thing going on, but you need something that's a definite deterrent that's going to stop them going out there. And just having, Mercedes and Red Bull were calling to have a timing loop put in there and have the curbs removed. So that's exactly what they were arguing about in Imola and other places when they're arguing about track limits. So it just seems no matter what happens, they're never happy. And I completely echo your point about Charlie Whiting as well. There was, you can't change the situation, obviously. And Charlie Whiting, after a very, very long time in the sport, had the absolute, the unequivocal respect of everyone. Everyone respected him. The only referee in sporting history to be loved by everyone. And Michael Massey just isn't that person. And I think he seems to compensate for that by the reason I call him that sassy Massey. You just hear by his tone when he talks to the drivers, I think you'll find, it's just, it just frustrates me, and it doesn't paint him in a great light as well. I've said from day one, he just seems like he wants to be a rock star. He comes in, he's throwing his weight around, and yes, he is obviously a very important person in that environment. But I don't. I have concerns, and we were talking before the show about, was it Mugello, and how it just seems to be very trigger happy on the red flag, and even admitted in Baku that the standing restart was to help the show. And that's not his job. His job is to make sure no one gets hurt. If someone gets hurt on that track due to a decision that he's made to spice up the show, where does it end? This isn't wrestling. This is a dangerous sport. Oh, what's happened to my camera? Jesus. This is a dangerous sport where people can and do die. And we can't have decisions like that being made because you want to spice up the show. That's not his job. That's someone else's job. That's not his. So he needs to focus on what he should be doing, and it should be a formulaic approach. It should be, because as you say, it's the inconsistencies, the formulaic approach of this happens, so this is the punishment. Constantly changing it all the time. We're on a podcast about Formula One, so we're obviously on the higher end of fans, because not a lot of people will listen to a Formula One podcast, let alone host one or be on one. So we're obviously people that understand the sport very well, and we get confused by it. So God knows how that affects the people that are just coming in and tuning in. Oh, there's a race on. I've heard that Formula One can be quite good. What's going on there? It's not good. It's not good for fans. They need to just sort it out, get something consistent in there, and just let it bed in, because changing it constantly, it's not good for the fans. It's not good for the sport. So yeah, we need something. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm not being paid a lot of money to come up with solutions. So those people need to get on it and find a solution.
Yeah.
It's quite. Sorry, Ruby.
I was just about to say, I can't remember if it is or not, but wasn't it the Paul Ricard circuit where Perez got a time penalty, I think it was, for going off the track, following the procedures for, if you did go off the track, but coming out ahead of a car, so therefore got then punished again.
Yeah, I do think on that situation it was slightly different, because the rule was, if I think it was on turn one, if you leave the track on turn one, you have to rejoin behind the bollards, which they currently do. He left the track after the apex of the turn, so then he basically drove across, accelerated across the runoff, and then drove through the barriers, and then came on 2 places further ahead. But equally, if they say, if you go off, you have to go there, they then need to put the caveat in there at the end of, or don't gain advantage. They could have then gotten a blow to him and said, right, you've gained 2 positions by doing that. That's not the point of the rule. You need to give those positions up. But they didn't. They just gave him a penalty, and that's the inconsistencies there. Because, as you say, he has kind of followed the rules, but it was slightly different to how they were intended. But that's not his fault. So that's what I mean. You need to have a common sense approach to the rules, but also formulaic in their application. But then obviously having the capacity there to say, well, hang on, no, that punishment doesn't fit that crime. Like, for example, cutting a corner and then instantly backing off and letting the car back through and not gaining any sort of advantage and actually losing time as a result of it. Something like that. You could say, fair cop, he's made a mistake, he hasn't gone through the runoff, but he's actually lost time because of it, so nothing needs to be done. That kind of thing, you need to have a common sense approach to it, but the consistency needs to be there.
Yeah. Go on, Steve, what were you going to say before you let me...
No, that's all right. You're all good. I was just going to say, I was looking at social media throughout the weekend, just Twitter and that sort of thing. Quite a few comments from people saying, just with respect to the sausage curbs and the track limits and that sort of thing as well. People saying, well, if they don't want to get a penalty or don't want to lose their time, don't go out there. Or if there was a wall there, they wouldn't go out there. It's like, well, there's not a wall there because we're not at a street circuit. There's a runoff area, but it's just I'm sort of circling back to what I was saying before, but it really annoys me that like Tom mentioned, that both Red Bull and Red Bull and Mercedes proposed an alternative solution, and the response to that alternative solution, which is a perfectly valid one with the timing loop, was nah, not interested. And I think consideration does need to be made, even to those bigger teams, that there's a budget cap in place, and we don't want to get to the end of the season where there are cars on circuit with compromised components that could fail and lead to an absolutely hideous accident. And that's a concern that I've had since the beginning of the season, when we've seen cars end up with half a wing missing. What happens when they get to the end of the season and a smaller team like Haas or a smaller team like Williams or Alfa Romeo suddenly turn around and say, shit, we don't have any current spec front wing components for this car. The front wing's incredibly important, so they put on a previous spec wing or try and repair the one that's damaged, and the repaired one fails, or the previous spec just does not work with the rest of their aero package, and it'll either null the competition or it will lead to an absolutely hideous accident. And I'm in no way interested in them increasing the budget cap again, or removing it altogether. I think the budget cap is a good thing from a competitive standpoint, but race control need to understand that every sausage curb that takes out a flow conditioner element or something like that, or a piece of floor or whatever it might be, that costs them money. It's not a 5-minute job to fix that. There's a lot of work that goes into repairing carbon, and these cars are largely carbon fiber constructed. So the sad thing is, until something horrible does happen, and I hate to think of what it would be, and I just can't stand seeing anyone in any sport get hurt. I wouldn't even want Mazepin to get hurt. I don't like him as a person at all, but that's just not something I wish upon anybody. And I feel like that's the only way at the moment that it's going to get through to race control, that they actually need to start looking at alternative solutions to what they've got at the moment, because the current system is inconsistent. It's impractical. It removes the entertainment element from the sport, as Tom mentioned before, and it's unsafe.
Yeah, and when Michael Massey is saying that he's making decisions based on the entertainment, yeah, you'd think he'd pay attention to that aspect, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but what's entertaining about risking, drivers' lives just for the sake of, a few more bums and seats or whatever his justification may have been? I don't understand that. Like, for his call in Baku to increase the spectacle, nobody's at the circuit. There were no fans. Everybody's sitting at home watching on television. They're likely just going to sit there and watch through the red flag, procedure anyway. Like, there was no indication that the race would be stopped altogether. There was still 2 laps to play for, but he shouldn't be factoring that into his job. His job is to make sure people don't get killed or hurt. That's it. And it's odd that it comes down purely to, I believe the final decisions are made by Michael Massey, aren't they? Like, it's not a case of 2 or 3 people making those decisions. Is that right?
I believe that's the case, yeah.
Top.
That alone is pretty concerning. That there should be. I know that there's drivers on, like former drivers involved with race control, but why isn't there a former driver or two actually being not an opposing voice, but an alternative point of view to his calls? Because he's not a race driver.
No, I think when it comes to safety, it's important to have somebody with his finger on the trigger to make these decisions quick. If you make decisions by committee, then people get hurt. So I think it's good that you have that, but every decision needs to be under under review and be afterwards. Like Mercedes, the way Mercedes operate, everything they do, they analyze and think, how could we do better? We won the race, but how could we have won it by more? It should be the same thing. Okay, so we did this. I called for a safety car here. Was that the right decision? Next time that happens, would I do it in that way, or should it have been a double wave yellow? Everything should be under review and constantly trying to improve the safety of the show. And so I agree that it should be one person there making that decision, but there should be everything in place to allow those decisions to be made correctly.
Yeah, when it comes to safety, you want swift and, precise. When it comes to track limits, you want, everyone, you want alternative voices.
I thought just to sort of clarify that, like, I don't mean like every on-track incident needs to be needs to be a committee-based decision. Like, I was very happy that he was so eager to push to call for a red flag after Romain Grosjean's accident last year, and that's the right call. But these decisions of deleting lap times over an ambiguous sort of track limits discretion where there's really no time gained or lost, apply the penalty, but really there needs to be more than one person actually making those, not making the decision, but there needs to be a couple of other people there to look at it afterwards and go, actually, this isn't necessarily a fair call, or, this penalty might be a bit harsh, or, can we look at another way of penalizing this without, removing that driver's lap altogether, because that's not necessarily fair. But yeah, like I said before, I think it's an argument that it'll just continue until either changes are made at a race control level and they do introduce some more like group-based decisions around penalties they apply, or we see another incident that none of us want to, and then it's a reactive decision, and by then, in my opinion, it's far too late. The damage has already been done.
Yeah, so I think on that note, it takes us up to a good point to call that the post show. Thank you very much if you stuck around on the YouTube having a listen and watch. Like I said, we will be back tomorrow to review the race results. Tom especially will be back tomorrow to see how accurate his bold prediction and top 3 predictions were. So fingers crossed for you, Tom. Fingers crossed for you. Mostly because some of mine overlap, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, but, thanks for Tom and Steve for coming on.
Always a pleasure.